So as we go along here, if you have any questions, one of the other members of the early career researcher team has changed their name on the participants list to ask questions here. So if you have a question that comes up as we're talking, please send it over there, and then we'll work on those behind the scenes, and I will be moderating discussion as we move forward. Just so you know, if you do have your audio and video on, if you could please turn them off just to preserve bandwidth, that would be greatly appreciated. And as you all probably got a notification when I did, we are recording this call so that we can replay it onto the AGU YouTube channel later on. And let's see, we do have these webinars once a month on the second Friday of every month at this time. So hopefully you'll be able to join us more lately. We will pass along that link in the chat here. However, next month we'll be at a slightly different time than usual. So we'll have Claire Horwell giving a joint talk between the Early Career Researchers Group and then also the broader GeoHealth section. She'll be talking about the challenges of chronic and delayed disasters and insight from volcanic eruptions and their potential impact. And that will be on Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern, tentatively. Since she is coming to us from the UK, we're kind of working on a slightly different schedule. So stay tuned to all the usual channels such as AGU Connect and the Twitter feed to get more information on that as it rolls out. Also, we are currently recruiting for more members of the Early Career Committee. So if you are a member of AGU and would like to help us out, please let myself or one of the other members of the committee know, and we will, I can post my email within the chat so you can reach out to me. And finally, if you're not a member of AGU, please consider doing so. I know we reach out to hopefully a lot of different channels and other organizations outside of AGU GeoHealth. And if you would be interested in participating in GeoHealth or just AGU in general, please consider joining. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen here and I will hand it over to Dr. Mike Whimberly and Dr. Susan Anenberg. So I'll give both of you just a chance here to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit more about your background, your experiences writing proposals, and maybe any tips that you have just kind of off the top here, and then we'll dive into more questions. So let's go ahead and start with Dr. Anenberg, and yeah, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm truly honored to have been invited to speak with this group about proposal writing. I'm a professor of environmental health at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health. My background is my PhD is in environmental science and engineering with a minor in environmental policy. And I spent some time prior to coming back to academia in governmental institutions like the EPA and the US Chemical Safety Board. So in terms of writing proposals, I've been doing this for a relatively short amount of time. I've been in academia for about 4 years. I did have a little bit of time working as an independent consultant in between being a federal employee and coming back to academia. So I've been writing project plans and proposals, I guess, for about 5 or 6 years. A couple of things that I wanted to just kind of, tips off the bat as somebody who just joined academia and is kind of getting, over the past 4 years have been getting my feet wet myself in terms of proposal writing and building a research group. Number one is that your institution probably offers some things that you can take up, you can take them up on. And I just wanted to mention a few that at least my institution offers. I think many do though. One is that there's grant writing training that many institutions offer. And I find that honestly to be so helpful. And in fact, I'm just going to show you, didn't dig this up before, but I took one training at GW that resulted in me having this book here it's a very long book, all about writing NIH proposals. And it was super helpful. I continue to refer back to it. It just has great tips and tricks And so, that's an opportunity that you can take your university up on if they offer it. They typically do NIH and NSF specific trainings, and there are differences between the, how you write proposals for different agencies. The second thing that you can take your institution up on is pilot programs. So I have been fortunate enough to have received 2 pilot grants from my university, and that's really helpful to just kind of test ideas. It allows you to have some resources to do some preliminary research, generate some preliminary data that might be necessary in a larger grant proposal to a federal agency. So those pilot programs, and with those pilot programs, they're often targeted towards early career researchers, and you have a smaller group of people that you're competing against. So that's definitely something where you have a real opportunity to be successful and really start building your program. And then the third thing is programs like Mentor Match. That's what my university calls it. But some program where you are your university supports you in sending your proposal out to an external reviewer and providing you feedback ahead of the deadline. It's just so useful to get the feedback from somebody who might be in your field prior to submission, and then you can incorporate that feedback and submit the proposal. So those are some of the things that I would recommend taking your university up on. A couple other just overarching points to make is that I think a lot of people worry a lot about content and having a good idea, and that's certainly important for a research proposal. But I would say personally that writing and communicating is at least equally important. So you might have the best idea and a very great technical approach, but it is unlikely to get funded if it's not communicated well. And so do take that time to sit with the proposal, with the writing. You have to take as much time with writing the proposal, at least as you would a journal article, at least I would say, and just think about it through the lens of somebody who is not you. And some of the ways that I do that personally, this might sound kind of silly, but I find it to be personally really helpful, is that if I have written the whole proposal in one particular location, say my office or one particular room of my apartment or house, after I've written the whole thing, I then print it out and take it to a different room. And I read it out loud. It's really crazy to say out loud, I know, but this is actually what I do for everything I write. I take it to a different location, I read it out loud, and that helps me kind of step outside myself a little bit and think about this through the lens of somebody else who might be reading it. How does this read? Are there gaps in my logic? Does it sound really technical when I should be writing it in a way that is a little bit more broad for a potential reviewer that might not be in my specific area? So that's just one overarching comment I would make. The last thing I'll say before turning it over to Dr. Wimberly is that it is just so critically important to follow instructions. Just really follow instructions. And I know you have to read the solicitation ahead of time before you start developing the idea and before you start writing it. Once you develop the idea, go back to the solicitation and make sure that the topics that you're planning to work on are in line with what they're seeking. And then after you write the whole thing, go back again and make sure that you have followed the directions to a T. Because the proposals that these agencies are getting in the competition is tough. It is really tough. People are writing great proposals. So you want to give yourself the best foot forward. You don't want to tank your proposal by forgetting to, write one element. Like if they asked for a succession plan or a sustainability plan or something for what's going to happen to your work after this grant ends, and you forgot to put that in there, it's going to be challenging to get your proposal funded. So just make sure that you have you've checked all the boxes for what the solicitation is asking for. And that does require going back to that solicitation multiple times in the writing process, just to, ensure that you followed the directions to a T. So I'm so excited to, respond to any questions that people have, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Wimberly for now.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Mike Whimberly. I am currently a professor of geography at the University of Oklahoma. Just a little bit about my background. I guess like many people, I got into this GeoHealth space through kind of an oblique route. My graduate training was in ecology, forest ecology. Really focused on landscape change and disturbances like fire, which I still am very, very interested in. But when I was in my first faculty position at the University of Georgia, I kind of ended up in this situation where I sort of fell in with a band of veterinary parasitologists, in particular because one in particular had an NIH project, and one of their investigators had left, and they needed someone who worked with, at broad scales with geospatial data and modeling. So it was something, I mean, honestly, something that at the time I hadn't really thought about getting into, and I actually hesitated for a little bit. I said, well, let me think about this. I was like, is this something ticks? Is this something, and it was a tick-borne disease project. So I was like, is this really something I want to get into? But the ecology of it was actually very interesting. And it was kind of just a little baby step going from forests and forest habitats to ticks and their hosts and infectious diseases in the Southeast. And then I got kind of hooked on it, and it ended up being sort of a slippery slope, getting me, to the point where working on particularly vector-borne diseases and climate and habitat and public health is really the core of my research program right now. And a lot of that, and part of the reason for that, probably the main reason, was because I have been successful over the years at getting funding for this work, particularly through NIH. And, the way that went was that I was on, so I was brought in on an existing R01 NIH project. And as that was wrapping up, I was completely into it at that point. I was like, well, I'd like to do some more with this. So there was and still is a mechanism for small grants at NIH called an R03. And one of the things that you can do for that mechanism is, follow up on previous studies, reanalysis of existing data. So I ended up, I wrote a proposal for one of these R03 small grants. And a lot of it was built on, the work that had already been done through the existing grant. But that got, much to my delight, I was able to get that funded. And then as I moved deeper into my career, I was able to get a couple of R01 grants funded, not on ticks, but focused on malaria in Ethiopia. And all of these things involve kind of a very, a very complex route to getting into them. And I won't bore you with all of those background details, but so just from my perspective, most of the experience that I have with writing grants and in many, certainly not all cases, getting them funded has been through NIH and and also through NASA. And so, if I can, I think if there's one big overarching key to getting grants, and I guess it's not a key because it's so there's always a random aspect to it. You know, you can do everything right and still not get your proposal doesn't get funded for a variety of reasons. So, you know, there's no key like secret sauce magic that's always going to get it to work. But I think it gets back to what Susan said, and it's this challenge of realizing that when you're writing, and it's the same thing with, similar with manuscripts. When you're writing it, when you're putting words down on paper, generally they always make sense to you because it's your idea and you've already thought it through. So it's understanding it's being able to look at look at what you're writing, look at what you're proposing from the perspective of the other person who is reading it and reviewing it. And I think also part of it is, is realizing that the review process and the funding process is a very human process. I can think back to when I started out, and you feel like you put a ton of work on something and you cast it, you send it in, you cast it out into this void and you don't hear anything for months. And, it feels like you've sent it off, into outer space, and some cosmic oracle is going to pass judgment on it and determine whether it's good enough to be funded. When in reality, it's read and reviewed by people who are human beings like you and me, who are typically volunteering on grant panels, don't have a lot of spare time to do this, who are squeezing it in between teaching classes and their family responsibilities and everything, all of the emergencies that are popping up all the time. And it, it gets back to Susan's point about thinking it from the perspective of that reader and the reviewer, and in terms of the point about writing quality. I think one of the reasons that, and I agree with Susan's point, that quality is so important is, typically people don't have, they can't block off, right, I'm going to spend all afternoon curled up in front of the fire with your grant reading through it. You've got 10 or 20 of these things piled up and you're just trying to plow through them. And sometime, if you start getting, bungled up, hung up on, it's like, oh, wait, this doesn't make sense. Oh, wait, this, it's hard to understand what people are saying. Things are inconsistent. Then, there's a tendency, even if the idea is good, you impute on that, okay, if they can't express it so that I can read it, they don't know what they're talking about. Whereas the one that you read and it's just like, it's smooth, you go through it, once or twice, ding, 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 you understand what they're proposing. That's the one that stands out. The other thing to think about is what reviewers do in a review session. Typically, and this varies from funding agency to funding agency, but generally there's some kind of arrangement where there's always one person who's the primary reviewer. And, so you have one plus maybe a small group of others who are going to read a particular grant very carefully, make comments on it, and then they're going to go to the rest of the panel, and in some cases they might champion that grant. So that's the way that grants typically get funded, is your prime or your number one reviewer is really gung-ho about it. They get up in front of the room, they kind of pitch it almost to the rest of the panel. And again, that has to do with how well that grant is written. Think of it from the perspective of making things easy for that primary reviewer. If it's a really well-written grant, they're going to say, hey, I'm confident that I can stand up and articulate, why this is a good idea, and potentially have to, this stranger potentially is on the hook also for defending your grant or defending your proposal against other people who might raise objections or have questions about it. So I guess if there's one overarching, well, I guess let me recommend two things that I think helped me. One is actually getting some colleagues or mentors to let you look at their successful grant proposals. And it's not like there's necessarily going to be secrets in there, or you're going to like copy stuff out of your proposals, but just seeing the way that a really good proposal kind of like comes together and hangs together, the way, everything from some of the aspects of how you format it, how it's written, how they use figures effectively in the presentation of preliminary data. I had, at several points in my career, I've had colleagues who were willing to do that for me. And I felt like that was really helpful to at least, to kind of see, it's like, oh, okay, this is what the end product should be like. And I need to do something that's kind of like this. And then the other thing, if there's any way to get experience on reviewing anything, and that could be, even reviewing manuscripts helps, but, particularly for postdocs, early career faculty, people are often desperate to get people on panels to help review, internal proposals within your institution. And even, NASA, for example, if you're a postdoc or an early career researcher, they're always looking for people to help review their grad student fellowship proposals. But again, putting yourself in that position where you're looking at it from the other side. In my experience, and again, speaking from my own experience, I did get some opportunities to do that early in my career. And that's really when some light bulbs start to go on. It's like, oh, this is what reviewing grant proposals is like. And I've got to, okay, here I am, and I've got this stack, and I've got to figure out, okay, out of all of these, which are the ones that I'm going to stand out, that I'm going to champion? Which ones can I just set aside and, recognize, just like, they're not making, they're not making the bar in terms of however you're going to score it. So, anything you can do to put yourself on the other side of that relationship and, provide some service while gaining experience, I would strongly recommend that.
Well, thank you both for those answers. I think there's a lot of information in there. I really liked the thought of thinking of the human side of grant writing and grant reviewing. I think that's something that's really important for all of us to keep in mind as we're writing. And I think both of you touched on this a little bit within the context of your answers. But one of the questions that has come in is, how do you go about writing these proposals that are, interdisciplinary and that have two very different, potentially different components to the proposal? But then related to that, how do you, what are the differences when you're writing a grant proposal for, say, NIH versus NSF or NASA? I think those two are somewhat related and intertwined, so I'll throw both of them out at the same time. But if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
I can maybe start and offer some thoughts. Pretty much every proposal I write is interdisciplinary, and I think that's probably true of everyone in GeoHealth. It's a very interdisciplinary field, so it's a struggle we all identify with. And I'll just be honest and say it is a struggle. It is. We've got a grant funding system in the U.S. that is a little bit divided. So we've got NIH that focuses mostly on health. We've got NSF that mostly focuses on basic sciences, but also some applied sciences, but typically, is considered to not do health. And then we have other agencies like NASA, who is increasingly at the intersection, which is fantastic to see. Or EPA. We didn't have the EPA possibility for many grants over the last 4 years, but now I think we should expect to see those opportunities ramp back up. And those are typically interdisciplinary. So I would say start with knowing the agency, because the agency is in control of who's on the review panels, and who's on the review panels is in control of what happens with your proposal. So this really understanding the agency in the context of that agency to which you're submitting is really important. If you submit something to NIH that is mostly focused on some more basic sciences that don't have much to do with health, and then health is an add-on, it likely won't be reviewed well at NIH. And similarly for NSF, if you're submitting something that is very intensive in terms of the health side of things, it'll likely be viewed in an NSF review panel as not something that's within the realm of NSF to fund. So you have to kind of understand the context of which you're submitting to. But now let's say you know that context, and you understand, let's say you're submitting to NASA. NASA has an applied sciences program, and they're looking for something that is interdisciplinary, and that's explicit in the solicitation. That's awesome. That's fantastic for GeoHealth, because we work at this intersection. Typically what happens in these interdisciplinary proposals is you might be working with a team of people. And I would recommend doing that. It's very difficult for any individual to know the whole field of the multiple whole fields as you're submitting a proposal. So consider working with the team. And you can write proposals by team. It can be a team effort. It doesn't have to be led by any single PI as the sole writer. But that said, there does need to be someone who goes through and after everybody writes their piece, who goes through and makes sure that the connections are there and makes sure that it's written in one consistent voice. I think that is what is sometimes the most challenging, is making sure those pieces are connected. If you're on a team and you're not feeling like you've really congealed, and maybe people are talking past each other because they're speaking in different, using different terminologies that, mean kind of different people, it might be more challenging to tell a consistent story in a proposal. And so I think who you write with is an incredibly important decision. And it's not going to be totally clear at the beginning of your career, who are the people that you jive with, and where you can come up with these interdisciplinary ideas, and more importantly, communicate the interdisciplinary ideas in a consistent way. But I would say once you find those people that it's working with, hold on to those people and keep writing with them. And that is, it can lead to a really fruitful collaboration over many years with successful proposals.
Yeah, I think that's great, excellent advice from Susan. I would just add a couple of things. I think there was part of that question about differences among the funding agencies, NSF, NIH, NASA. That's a good question, because they all have different cultures and different procedures. NIH, for example, probably has the most, I'm not sure how I would describe it, but kind of codified, rigid way in which the review process goes, and in which scoring is done. You have to, numerical scores on, the 5 main categories, which would be, significance, innovation, environment, investigators, and then approach is usually the easiest, the one where they come in and tear you apart. But then what determines whether you get funded is actually something else. It's called the overall impact score, which is sort of this mysterious thing. And it's not like, the mean or the median of all the other scores. So that's kind of one of the keys to NIH, is understanding, what are they talking about when they talk about impact? Because when it comes down to it, that's the only number that matters in your score. is impact. And again, probably, trying to talk to or work with someone who has experience, who's been on panels, is the best way to understand that. NASA, on the other hand, is very, NASA funds things that support their mission. And that could be, facilitating spaceflight. In a lot of the health applications, it has to do with leveraging, leveraging NASA assets. So it's, even if you have a brilliant idea, NASA is not going to fund it unless it is somehow, showing the world how, the air pollution data that they're collecting with their satellites can be used in some new way that's going to take our understanding up to the next level. And again, talking to people, trying to get examples of proposals that have been funded. And again, sometimes it comes down to, it's almost like an incantation. There are things that NASA likes you to say, they like to see in the proposals, certain wording that, very clearly say, okay, even though you think it's really obvious, why do I need to say this? Actually writing it down. Okay, what I'm proposing here aligns with this particular subcomponent of the NASA Earth Science or Applications mission and uses, these specific NASA assets. And then they don't have to guess, they can just check it off.
Great. Thank you both for some really good insights. I think it seems like the common theme here is just that the context of who you're writing for is so important to keep in mind as you're working through these proposals. One question that's come up a couple of times is, as early career researchers who maybe don't have a ton of publications to their name or an extensive demonstration of research in a particular area, how do you go about selling yourself as a viable candidate for being funded by one of these proposals?
Yeah, I can give some thoughts. So, it's a challenge in some ways because, like I said, the competition is tough, and often you're in the same pool as people who have been writing proposals for 30 years, and that makes it challenging. But I think there's some ways that you can give yourself a leg up. And one of those ways is seeking out opportunities that are geared specifically towards early career scientists. NIH has actually an early career investigator program where you are judged a little bit differently. Your proposals are evaluated a little bit differently than senior scientists. And so, if you're going after something like that, make sure you understand the rules. Are you still within that window that they give you? By the way, you can extend that window if you've taken time off or had children in that time frame. So make sure you're taking advantage of those opportunities. But I think there's rules like all the PIs on the proposal have to be eligible as early career investigators for it to work. So just be cognizant of those rules. So that's one thing. The second thing, I was going to also mention, there's other opportunities for early career researchers. There's, postdoc fellowships. There are sort of more launching as a PI fellowships from different agencies. And so make sure that you're looking into those opportunities that are geared specifically towards early career researchers. But I would say also there's a bit of a debate about, some people think that you should not be, as an early career investigator, writing with a senior mentor because you need to show your independence. And I don't think that that's really the case. I think it really is very beneficial for you to work with a senior scientist or somebody who has had more experience. As a co-PI or even as a co-I, sometimes there's opportunities in a solicitation to have a mentor. And I would say, try to find people who can who can participate in your proposal, because then you're building in the feedback that they can give you and improve your proposal over time. Once you get your feet wet, you've gotten a couple of these proposals, then you can start to worry about, am I living in the shadow of somebody else? But I don't think you really need to worry too much about that at the beginning. I think it's more beneficial for you to have somebody as part of your team who has some experience and can provide you that feedback and experience.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I would point out that NASA also has traditionally had a new investigator program that they'll roll out every few years. So I would, if you are early career, you've got to take advantage of those. And I think one of the challenges is it's hard to kind of, sort of trickle in. There aren't a lot of opportunities out there for, exploratory research or startup, kind of trying to build up a new line of research, which is often what people need to do early career. So yeah, the other options are, I think, again, if you can get in and work with other people as a co-investigator on another proposal, then you do that, and maybe you volunteer to go to the program meeting one year and go out to dinner with the program manager and talk to them and learn more and see what you see people talk about all of their funded projects, and you start learning a lot. So yeah, I mean, I support the idea that there's no, early in your career, anything that'll kind of get you, involved, to be a co-I on, NASA, NIH, NSF, and then that kind of opens the door for you to, be getting more engaged and learn more about the process and about what other people are doing in current research. I think there's a tendency, the funding agencies, I think in general, aren't excited at the idea of, funding a huge number of really small projects, in part because that's more of a burden for them to manage. And they want, they want kind of the fox and the hedgehog. The fox knows many small things and the hedgehog knows one big thing. So they want like hedgehog grants that are going to really move the science forward. And I guess the only thing I would add there is that, sometimes you've just got to, there's a point where you just have to step up and go for it. Say, hey, okay, I think, I've been collecting some data. I've got some colleagues who I think, could work with me on this, and I can call them up. Yeah, it's time to, jump in, and I'm going to start writing, R01s, or I'm going to start writing, standard NASA proposals or NSF proposals. And probably, the sooner you start doing that, the sooner you'll get one funded, because again, because of the human nature of all of this, it's, it's stochastic. It depends on, who is on the panel, and, are there maybe some considerations that you weren't aware of, and, how are people feeling at the very moment when they happen to be discussing your proposal. So I think if you really want it, you've got to, sooner rather than later, start getting yourself out there. You're probably going to get beat up a little bit, but that's the way you learn to move forward.
I can just add a couple of things to that as well. That I couldn't agree more that you just have to go after it. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to mention is just the volume of proposals that you have to put in to be successful is large. And, I write at least 10 proposals a year, and certainly do not get all of those funded. I would say I have a third to fewer funded of those. But just going through the process of putting in proposals is a huge learning process. And you may feel out of your depth at the beginning, or you may feel like this isn't going to get funded, and just stick with it anyway, because the whole thing is a learning process. And if you don't go through that, like if you put that off to the next one, then you have to go through the learning process on the next one. So just go through the process as much as you can. It's one of the most important things to do as an early career researcher. And it gets easier and you get better at it. It's a practiced and learned skill. So you have to have that practice to get better at it. And then one other point to make is that I completely agree with Dr. Wimberly that you do have to go after the big ones. But the question that Ryan posed is how do you kind of build up your CV or your proposal to look like somebody who can manage a large team or manage a large grant? And sometimes getting those smaller ones is a good way to do that. The smaller grants might have less competition. They might have higher success rates. You may honestly have to put in some ideas for things that aren't your top priorities. I certainly have done that to fund myself and fund my team. And so that's a way to, think every time you put in a proposal, frankly, it's a marriage between what the solicitation is and what you want to do. You may not be able to do everything you want to do, but hopefully you find this healthy balance between what the solicitation is and what your high priorities are. If you, on the spectrum have to, gear yourself a little bit more to, outside the box of what your personal, level of excitement is, just to kind of get those early wins that may be advantageous to pursue, just to kind of give yourself the higher chance of success for the future big ones.
Thank you both for the advice and perspective, and piggybacking off of, I think, what you both said about applying kind of all over the place and to as many different proposals, putting out as many proposals as you can. One question that's come in is like, how do you go about finding these opportunities? Is this something where you've identified different agencies and organizations that you feel are likely to have a relevant proposal or call for proposals? Thinking more in terms of the smaller organizations, so something outside of NSF or NIH. Do you have any particular tips and tricks for finding opportunities?
I have to say, I don't know that I do. That's, it's certainly something that I've struggled with at times. People will tell me, oh, did you, certainly you must have applied for this. I'm like, oh, why didn't I hear about that? And it's, probably, in many cases, the best, some of the best resources are going to be, like your research office on campus. So for example, I've worked in a variety of places, and it's not uncommon to be able to, your institution may subscribe to certain services and databases that will, scrub, look for various opportunities and send out information. But I've also learned that really varies from place to place. Some institutions are really into it and are really good at it. Others just kind of leave it up to individual faculty to figure that out for themselves. So yeah, the only thing I would say is it's worth at least checking in your current institution, in terms of like newsletters, databases, what services can they provide for you, and expertise as well. Is there someone you could make an appointment in and just drop in and, tell them about what you're working on and chat with them about possible opportunities.
I would recommend signing up for the listservs for the major agencies, NASA, ROSES, NSF, NIH. Sign up for those so you get them in your inbox, EPA as well. But as Ryan was saying, there's other ways of getting funding, and I think that's increasingly important to broaden your scope beyond just those large agencies because the competition is getting tougher. And so I wanted to mention a couple different types of opportunities. One is foundations. So there are a range of foundations that will provide research funding, and they actually do typically work more at the interface between society and science rather than funding basic science. So that maybe is good for people in GeoHealth. A couple challenges there are that a lot of them don't do unsolicited proposals. So you have to kind of know the program officers and have them sort of invite you to submit something. A second challenge is that they may not cover full indirects. Indirects is the amount of funds that goes directly to your institution when you get a grant. It doesn't and can't be used to fund your research staff on the grant. And that, those indirects go to fund administrative staff, fund your office, keep the lights on. So sometimes the foundations don't fund the full indirects. So just something to keep in mind. I know that's viewed differently at different institutions. But nevertheless, I think that's an important potential source of funding. And, it's the kind of thing where over time, it may be something where you have an idea that is along the lines of the focus of one of these foundations and a priority area of the foundation. You can find their priorities on their web pages. And over time, you sort of build your network and, kind of get to know the program officers there. But that does take time. But there are some foundations that do have unsolicited opportunities. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is one of them, just to name one, but there are others. And then another potential avenue for funding is more along the contract mechanism. Sometimes you can work on applied research projects, and this works very well in applied science, actually, where you have an idea that is of potential importance for a stakeholder who is not a big research grant funder. So say a non-governmental organization, an independent think tank, those types of organizations, they have close relationships with foundations who fund their work. And it may be something where you can work with them to devise a line of inquiry that is both scientifically of interest to you and helps them with a problem that they're having. And those contracts can be easier to get than massive research grants if you build your network. And that, I think networking is the key to them, is that you have to kind of know people, you have to have your work, get your work known, meet people. I know it's been more difficult over the past year and a half, but hopefully we'll get to a place soon where we can get back to meeting people, but meet agencies, meet organizations, stakeholders who are working in your space that you think your science can improve their line of work in some way, and get to know them. And you may be able to come up with some joint ideas. A couple of notes about that avenue is that they sometimes also don't pay the full indirects, so something to be aware of. Another thing is that it's more, you have more of a contractual relationship sometimes in these situations. So it may have deadlines that are very different than, how you might envision working as an academic on large research grants. And third, you just want to be open and honest about potential conflicts of interest when you're publishing, who was involved in the work and where did the funding come from?
Great, thank you. Another question that we've had come in: what do you feel is more important within proposal writing, the novelty of an idea or the continuation of a research thread that you might have going on within your lab?
I guess, I mean, I have sort of two answers to that. I mean, I guess the real answer is it depends. I do think that in many cases that novelty tends to be emphasized over the continuation of an existing line of research. That's just my general sense in terms of what I've seen in terms of proposal reviews and scoring and what people say and comments and feedback. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's actually, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing in the big picture. But I honestly do feel that there does tend to be a bias toward, people are more interested in, at least in some cases, in, taking bigger risk on what's perceived as, a novel idea, the potential for a big breakthrough, as opposed to maybe, less radical, but steady incremental knowledge building on. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be doing that kind of steady incremental work, because I think we actually miss out on a lot when it doesn't get done. But that's just my personal perception.
I have to say, I don't really know the right answer to this. I mean, it's something that I think is an everlasting question for everyone. Is do you go after the new ideas that are high risk, high reward, or do you go after the incremental advance that we're pretty sure we can do in this time frame and in this budget, but maybe a little bit less exciting to the reviewers? And maybe it's a balance. You just have to figure out what's the exciting advance that you can make that's more than just some incremental change. But you have to also show that you're capable of achieving that major advance within the time frame of the project. And I guess just to get a little bit more nuanced about it, the solicitation will tell you, how many years is the maximum number of years? What's the approximate budget? Typically, you're given that information. Say NASA will say, for example, that they have a certain budget and they expect to fund, a certain number of awards, 10 to 12 awards or something. And so you can do some, algebra to figure out what the approximate budget that you should have is. And then you start to think about, okay, I only have 2 years and this amount of funds. Can I realistically make this major advance? If the answer is no, you need more time, then maybe save that major advance idea for a larger solicitation that allows you more time and budget.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now we're looking at the clock here. We have about 5 minutes left in our time together. So I think I'll throw out one last question for both of you, which is, when you're first applying for grants, was there anything that happened that you thought was surprising, saw or had to do? And then were there any kind of unforced errors that you might have made that the early career folks here maybe?
You cut out there for a minute, Ryan. Was the question, were there any potential problems or unforced errors?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so the question is, when you were first starting to apply for these grants, were there any surprises, things that you weren't expecting? And then also, were there any unforced errors that you may have made that we could all try and learn from?
So I guess the thing that surprised me when I first started writing proposals was just how involved the process is. And maybe I was a little bit naive, but when you get into, I was only thinking, frankly, about the pitch, the narrative of the idea. And I thought, oh, maybe, I have to write 5 pages about this. And typically the narrative is 12 to 15 pages, first of all. But secondly, the narrative is just one small part of the full proposal. You've got to do your budget justification, your bio sketch. You've got to have the, if you have a multi-PI situation, you have to have a plan for that. You have to have a description of your facilities and equipment. And so it is quite a process to put together these things. And the way I was able to make it easier for myself was to take ample leverage of the people who are offering me help. And that is our research support staff at GW are there, they're, and you should have this at your institution. They're there to help you, figure out how do you develop your budget? Can they put together a template for you? And then you just have to fill in the numbers. So that was those were some of the ways that I was able to avoid some issues.
Yeah, I think this, along the same lines, give yourself enough time when you're doing it. If it's your first, if it's your first shot at, putting together a major proposal as PI, it's going to take, I would say it'll probably take longer than you expect because you've got to figure out a lot of things along the way. It will not always take that long. So think of it not as, my whole, self-image and career is going to depend on this one grant, but, starting out as sort of a campaign. It's like, all right, I'm going to get one out there. I'm going to understand how it comes together. I'm going to get some feedback on this. And then I guess one mistake I made when I was starting out was thinking, at that, in terms of assembling the proposal, that I had to do all this stuff myself. And I realized as I was deeply into it, like as Susan pointed out, that people in the research office were saying, well, we can do that for you. You don't, just give us this and we'll put that budget together or do this or do that. So yeah, figure out what resources you have available at your institution and leverage them to the greatest extent that you can, because again, that's part of that's part of the process. That's part of being successful.
And just to add one more thing to that is that, starting early is super important, not just to give yourself the time to build the idea, build the team and get all the documents together. But if you tell your research support staff too late that you want to put in this proposal, they might be committed to other people's proposals. And so you want to have it on their radar as early as possible so they can schedule their time and be of most help to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. We really appreciate all the insight and perspective that you were able to share. And I know that I learned a lot. Hopefully other folks on this call did as well. And yeah, I guess with that, we can call it a webinar. So thank you both again. And hopefully for everyone attending, we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks. You too.